one of the values for my brand is to ensure that it's easy to digest and it's not overwhelming and it doesn't feel like, oh, that's too complicated.
So, but I'm also looking at a perspective of, man, as a business owner, 3 companies we're running, we got the podcast going, we got the books, we got the speaking, we got all these moving parts. How the hell do I find time to bring all the brand science into it so we're creating all these legs? Man, I always love the episodes where I get to dive into these experts that just geek out on their world and the things they're doing. So I think this is going to be no different. So, Staeven, welcome to the show. Let me ask you a really quick question. When people are thinking about their brand and branding as a whole, where do they miss the overall concept of branding and how are they screwing it up?
Ooh, great question. So the biggest ways that we actually mess up and screw up are actually the things that we don't know about. And that's why I'm so actually passionate about brand science. It's the science of how effective branding works. So most of us understand that marketing is, hey, do business with me on a fundamental level. Right. You don't make cell phones. I don't make cars. How do I know whom to purchase from? So that's where branding comes in. That's where, you've got your brand mark with kind of the Spartan helmet. I remember that. I'm going to do business with them. Right. But what's interesting is there's a little subset, a little world that, nerdy glasses I geek out about. And it's how do we make that more effective? And so the fact that people don't know about brand science is already what's hindering them. So all the effort that they spend and all the time, I like circles or I don't like blue. So we know we're supposed to do things like, we want messages that capture and radiate with our audience, but even that's flawed thinking. So the fact that we don't know about brand science is why we're here today. So that's what I'm hoping to share.
Let's dive into it. So define brand science. I've actually not heard that term, so I'm actually looking forward to this now, really.
Yeah.
So define brand science for me.
Sure. So like I said, marketing is, hey, do business with me. Branding are any of the sensory assets or devices in your marketing, your color, your words, shapes, those sensory assets that we remember of the businesses and the brands that we hopefully want to work with, or they want us to hopefully work with. So brand science is the study of how do we make branding more effective. And there's actually about 13 different sciences that help us understand how to communicate.
Is this like psychological? Is this?
It's a smattering. There's a smattering. There's everything from like literally sequence of cognition, how we process shape, color, then content. So you may see a shape and it may be oval and you're like, it's Samsung. And then it's blue and you're like, it's definitely Samsung. And then it's Ford.
Oh, right.
So depending, so then all of a sudden there's another thing. It's our animalistic kind of evolutionary mind knows, red berry's bad. We make associations with colors, shapes, those things based on the context of our surroundings. So obviously, it's not Samsung if you're at a car lot, silly goose.
Right.
So based on the context of where you are and what you're doing, there are different boxes. And this is where science number 2 comes up. It's called semiotics. Semiotics are these little boxes that fit and we create them in our minds. So if I said to you, hey, Donnie, go get me something out of the fridge that's white, that's in the door.
We're gonna go milk, right.
That's in the door. That's a condiment. That's in a jar. That's a vegetable.
I went from milk to all and now to, that's a jar of vegetable. Now we're getting eggs or
right.
I went to milk to mayonnaise to then something else.
Right. So your mind just went through this process of white. It's like a March Madness bracket. What are my options? And you probably landed on onions or horseradish. If anybody has a jar of onions, they are a hardcore Chicago hot dog person. That's the only way you would have those. Well, but usually, if anything, it's horseradish is the only option that's left. And I like to use that as an example of semiotics because your brain had several different categories, but then it took you there. And it's kind of a low risk example that doesn't make fun of anybody too. So we've got semiotics. We also have just category norms. And so some of the category norms are just colors and shapes and items that are used kind of as trade dress. So red means cola, but red and all the assets that Coca-Cola has put together specifically make that their brand identity. But you see Big K and Dr. Cola, or maybe that's a bad example. That's supposed to be Dr. Pepper ripoff. But all the and then there's some deviation in the norms. There's blue. RC Cola. Historical Pepsi. There's some other, but for the most part, red can be used to define a category in the soft drink beverage category. What's interesting is people will not address this, and this is cultural contextualization. So what does this mean in my culture, in my context? So there's like little things like yellow, and people are like, oh, yellow means happy. And you're like, actually, no, yellow means stained teeth in the dental industry. So we're not going to use, and Colgate and Crest all wondered why lemon mint didn't take off. They tried to make it so blue. It's like blue and yellow. You're like, what is that? So there's several of these that just stack up.
Because when we're seeing the colors or where we're seeing the images, we're going through that March Madness bracket in our heads.
You have no clue.
Right.
So this is actually a great example. Nobel Prize winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman has this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Yep. And so that book actually talks about how 95% of our brain, it's not left brain, right brain. It's not creative. It's not, those are just kind of like, which Disney princess are you? Those are just like BuzzFeed kind of like, they're not really tested, but they're just models that we've used. The most true model is that 95% of your brain is always on. It's always absorbing, and it's making sense of the world around you. And that's actually what our senses, like we think, oh, what are the five senses? But what does that word actually mean? We're actually trying to understand and decipher the world around us. So I try to
survive the world around us, right?
Right. So some of these shapes and colors and things we learned, inherently, that red and stop, culturally and contextually in the US and most places, like that's what that means. So we're always on autopilot and we're always absorbing. So you may hear a song in, the elevator or in a store and then be whistling it later because your mind actually absorbed it. And it was like, the girl from Ipanema, and you're like, where did that come from? What?
Yeah.
This is why branding works, because the goal of branding is to make people think of you first. And this is really the conversation. There's so many different angles, and people want to talk about the immutable laws of branding and how do brands, like, what is a brand? And I'm like, it's like a little kitten. I'm like, thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. And I'm going to set this kitten over here and we're going to talk about something else, or it's a puppy. It's probably more of a puppy, puppy energy. What is branding? A brand is this, a brand is that. And so many people want to chime in and talk to you what brand is. But instead we want to talk about how do brands function. And if we know how brands function, we can make them more successful.
Well, and to kind of your puppy or kitten analogy, which I think most times people want to do is get to that puppy and be like, okay, branding's done. We did that part. Let's go on to something else. Versus thinking of the lifespan or the lifetime, not value, but the life cycle of a brand, if you will.
Sure. What's really interesting is you kind of brought up two things. Is one, that's a myth right there. Like, branding is not a one and done activity. You may go through a very strategic, I was listening to a couple of your other episodes and talking about values and going through those and the difference between corporate and personal brand. And yes, like going through your values and stuff, I don't want to knock that. That is important. But what's interesting is that's like one strategic component, and you should always be evaluating that. But like, you may go through like a deep dive first when you're creating the brand, but then you have to grow and you have to nurture the brand consistently and consecutively. And it actually looks a lot different than we think in the business world. And it's actually based on mental availability and physical availability. So those are the metrics: mental availability, physical availability, and scale. And we have a guest in this podcast, this Mr. Peanut Butter, and he's going to
it's
step on my power. I was
it's
on a
all right. It's
podcast
real
one
life,
time,
man.
and it just went boop. And I was like, oh, he's stepping on the cord surge protector. Good
Nice,
job. So
right?
at the end of the day, mental availability and physical availability are the two words that drive our brand. And really, mental availability is just that top of mindness. I want people to think of me first. So then when I roll into the gas station, Coca-Cola doesn't have to introduce their brand. They don't have to tell me to go buy it. They don't have to tell me it's 99 cents. When I walk in, I've seen those signs and my mind is on autopilot. And it's like, oh, I'm just going to reach for a Coke because I have the mental availability of being prompted that this is what I buy at a gas station.
Right.
And then I have the physical availability of here's all the places I can buy it.
I think there's one more aspect of the brand has to maintain the same level of experience that we were expecting. So what I mean by that is my wife and I went to Ireland. We stopped at a gas station and they had Snickers bars. I'm like, oh, let's just get a Snickers as on our road trip to go. Well, Ireland has completely different food laws than the U.S. does.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we got these Snicker bars. We both took a bite of our Snicker bars and just kind of looked at each other because they didn't taste anything like a Snickers bar. Right. It was a completely different experience because of the food laws in Ireland versus the U.S. Ireland doesn't allow all the extra processing that the U.S. does. So you're getting more of a real product in Ireland than we get in the U.S. and all the crap they put in it. So for 2 seconds, my brand image, if I'm saying that right, was completely disrupted from what I was expecting from the experience.
Were you surprised and delighted in a good way? I mean,
it was it wasn't a bad,
Sure.
It was just different.
Sure.
I was able to logically explain why that happened, right?
Sure.
My wife and I are both instantly like, well, of course it's different. We're in Ireland. They're going to have things taste different. Like a Coke should taste different, in different countries.
Right. The cat agrees. I don't know if you heard him. The cat agrees.
Yeah.
It's interesting you bring that up. Is obviously brand experience is a part, and that's a food related one, which is even though folks that are in in the community, they might not have a food business. That example is still true, that you do want to create a consistent experience. Now, if you're over in Ireland, that is a consistent experience for people who have, so you went out of a context of, your normal consumer behavior habits.
For sure.
The big things that help drive sales at the end of the day. So we think marketing is really important. And everyone's like, yeah, we got to tell people to do business with us. We got to tell people to do business with us. And really, it doesn't matter whether it's social media, whether it's online, it's print, it's radio. If people don't know about radio, it still exists. But that used to be a more popular tool. Why? Because as technology changes, the tools of our marketing change. And that's always going to be true. There's going to be, magic flip window marketing soon. Like, I don't know. I just made that up. But if there's ever like floating TV screens, that's going to be a thing. I think I've even seen ads on fridges already.
Yeah.
So we don't want to get hung up on the tool or the technology, but we do want to know that at the end of the day, for you to be top of mind only happens by two things. One, obviously marketing. Marketing shares the message. It says, hey, do business with me. There's the branding that's in there. And the more distinctive brand assets you have in your marketing that people can remember, the more memories you're making. The more memories you're making based on the senses, sight, sound, touch, feel, hear, and actually break this down. One of my most popular requested things is actually called the distinctive brand asset palette. And I came up with this checklist, and if listeners are interested in it, we can put it in the show notes for them. It's just a super easy assessment. But the categories that we want to have for our brand is we want to have color assets, a single color, a color combination. Yours is black, white, and red, that combination. At the end of the day, probably you would just do red if you had to, maybe. Why? Because red's more distinct than black or white? I don't know. So people usually have like one color option. So that's why we have them, because we want to have color assets that, drive that. And then we've got words like the typefaces that you're using, words of your program maybe, or your product, if it's a proprietary process, your tagline, the best baskets for kittens, whatever. Your tagline is just another mnemonic or memory tool. Then you've got shape, which may be, symbolic images, like the shape of do you call it a helmet? Is that what you call yours?
Helm.
Okay. So, the helm itself, that's a shape. It's a symbolic shape. But if you were selling products and your business sold products, you would have pack shapes, the shape of the box that stuff comes in, to have a trademark, shape of your package, like Coca-Cola's bottle to Febrez's bottle. Those are a few really specific examples, to the product themselves, like a Swiffer that's designed specifically to look unique. So we've got color, word, shape, and then the last ones are real easy here. Music, sound, and then characters or people. So spokespeople, celebrity characters. And these are the sensory categories that we want to have as many of these to be as distinct in our category and famous as possible. Because if they're not, nobody's going to think of us. And the more chances we have of thinking of us increases. So the key to brand growth is having high mental and physical availability. And we have that. That's achieved by having really distinct, well-known brand assets. So that's the path. That's the difference between a mom and pop, which typically has 3 to 5. The average business doing, 2 to 8 million, believe it or not, has 5 to 10 brand assets. That's not a lot. Smaller businesses typically only have 3 to 5, their brand name, their color, their brand mark, and maybe a tagline. So we want to be like Fortune 500 companies, because here's why. Fortune 500 companies know the secret of brand science. They've been paying to access it since it was incepted in the 1960s. Even before that, when there was Ford and Chevrolet, there was a scientific study by Baker, is the researcher that did it, and they found that Ford and Chevrolet had the same customers. There was nothing different. People wanted to say, "Oh, my customers are different." And actually, 95% of people who drink Coca-Cola also drink Pepsi.
So let me ask, this is fascinating. And I like the fact that you've broken it down to such a level that makes people think. When I created my logo, we'll start there.
Sure.
I was getting T-shirts made, and I went up to a T-shirt place. A friend owned a Big Frog custom T-shirt shop.
Right.
And I said, "Hey, I need T-shirts made." She goes, "Do you have a logo?" I said, "Nope." She goes, "We'll create one for you."
Sure.
And they made the helm. So the helm itself, I told them the story that I came, for me, the name of the company, Success Champions, based on the movie Troy, and then putting Brad Pitt out front to defend the armies. And I said, these kings chose this one person to stand out front and be the champion, winner take all. But how often do people do that for themselves? How often do they choose themselves and become their own success champion? And that's how I came up with the name.
Sure.
And they created the helm. So the helm itself creates an S to make the brand. So it's even got a little hidden meaning inside there for success champions. But that was all the thought that went into the brand.
Sure.
They asked me what my favorite colors are, and I said black and red, right? So that's where that combination came from. So if I were going to try and extend the brand further.
Sure.
Because we don't even have a distinct tagline other than we've thrown around a lot, "Don't build your business alone."
Sure.
As a tagline. So we would essentially have to come up with a tagline that we completely owned. And then what else? How do we add
Sure.
a voice to it? There's a lot of things to should I bring in the influencers, and extend it beyond there? So, I mean, I know that I'm asking a bunch of questions in
Yeah.
succession, but I think you know where I'm trying to
Sure.
get to.
So this is the interesting thing is most people want to know, like, what do I do? Where do I start?
Right.
Typically if you were a new client of mine, I would say, let's go do some research. What is your category? And we would make sure that the shape and the color, like those things, like we're actually going to go out and say, like, okay, what are leading business podcasts or leading business networking group businesses, or, the type of that category. We would do all the research and we would come back with, how I mentioned color, shape, word, all those things. We literally would have a sample set of the top 100 local, regional, national, and international, so that we could see the patterns and say, like, oh, wow, a lot of these start small and they're red, but when they get big, they turn blue. Huh, that's interesting. And there may be interpretation there may not be. But the goal is, when we look at that, we can see, like, oh, is red really easy and distinct in your category? Or is it going to be difficult for you to own and people associate with you? So the first thing is we kind of do a category audit. And this is literally where I'm researching the distinctive brand assets of everybody in the category. Then
So
we
is
can.
that enough to say, let's just go pull all the logos together?
So that's one column. There's really one column that has every brand mark of every type in your category. But then here's the other thing: you're actually not just the sum of one category. You're actually the sum of usually 2 to 3 additional ones. So then there may be, like, business networking, and then there may be business groups. So then BNI may be there, and then maybe there's, like, podcasts. So maybe one of them is podcasts, one of them is networking, and one of them is business apps. Just throwing this out there. We'd
Right.
obviously hone down what these categories are, because you have kind of, it's like a tricorn or triclover. You're a Venn diagram of 3 categories typically. Because here's
Because our third one would likely be events with our summits
Sure.
and the
Great
like.
example. Great example. So you want to be distinct in that category of events. So this is where it gets just like our fridge example. You may have white chocolate creamer in your fridge, or a flavored creamer. Well, you know that when you look at that package, like, yellowy tan is hazelnut, maybe like purple is white mocha, and then cinnamon is like a seafoam. I don't know. But then those norms also carry over into the bakery. And they also carry over in the cookie aisle. And here's the
Right.
interesting thing, that some of those colors and those norms of shape, word, color, story, assets, those influence, and those are a borrowed memory structure. So it's my job to look at your categories and say, which one is everyone sharing? And we want to acknowledge, because we want to get in people's heads faster. So, great example, coffee, and I just use example with desserts, but even like coffee shop, like the bean from the tree to the farm to the roaster, like that story, that's a shared memory structure. Nobody
Yep.
can own that story, but they can own the Starbucks coffee master. They can show the guy in the shirt out there with the farmer and then roasting it. So, like, they're adding their assets on a layer, and to, like, envelope that and have more distinctive assets that are distinctive to them. So the goal is for you to have these assets that are distinct to you. So you've got the helm, you've got the colors. The first step would be, you've already got those. So we would most likely test which ones are working, which ones aren't. And then see, like, how does this stack up in my category? And then what are the other assets? The goal is we would want to get you to at least 25 to 30 distinctive brand assets.
Wow.
So that is
That's
the
a
starting
ton.
point. We want you to have at least, and I say you, Donnie, but also the listeners, like, we're using you as an
Right.
example here, you want to have at least 25 to 35 distinctive brand assets.
Okay, so I want to make sure I'm totally understanding the brand asset. So that brand asset could be a song, it could be a celebrity endorsement,
Sure.
it could
It could be
be
a vocal style. I'm Tom Bodett, and I'll leave the light on for you.
right,
And then you've got
right,
the
right.
bow, 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 and then you got the
Yep.
jingle. So you've got a vocal sound. It may even be the noise on your app, or it may be even the opening intro, on your videos. That if you're using that consistently, when people hear that, you're like, oh, is that Pearl Jam? No, that's the podcast I'm listening to. Like, they know, like, Like they immediately know what it is because there may be a music asset. Sometimes popular songs. The first time I heard "Fly Like an Eagle" was a USPS commercial when I was a little kid. I didn't know that that was a classic rock song.
Well, it's like the Eminem song and the Under Pressure song, or the Vanilla Ice song and the Under Pressure
Right,
song.
right,
They both start out the same thing, but they're two completely different
right,
songs.
right.
You know, the dun
So
dun dun
so
dun
when
dun
we
dun.
here's the cool thing is you've got Queen and Under Pressure, and you hear that dun 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 dun. And here's the thing we do in our mind. It's like a little cluster of memories. And then the reason we use these well-known celebrities or songs or spokespeople or characters, it's one more element that we remember. And now if it's a famous person, they have a lot of memories or nodes, and we like quick, whoop, we tie a string
Yep.
to it. And all of a sudden it becomes like a spider web of memories that were, oh, shape, word, color. Oh, you're not you when you're hungry. Betty White and Danny DeVito in that funny commercial back in the.
Yes.
And why? Because a celebrity, it's already known. So what they're trying to do is, and we see this and we know when it works and when it doesn't. It doesn't
Right.
work when there's a person, and it's maybe like famous rock stars that we haven't heard of in a while and they come back. Unless we had a lot of top of mindness with that celebrity, we can't swing the memories over. So the endorsement is funny, it's notable, we'll talk about it for a week, but it doesn't drive brand equity unless it really drives us to actually think about it, talk about it, and recreate and marry more memories together. So the goal is, and here's a really, really interesting thing. No marketing activity in and of itself is more important than the other. So you may have Facebook, you may have social media, you have paid ads, you may have SEO, you may have a lot of things going on. I recommend people have just two that you champion as your main channels. It's like two engines. You want two engines, on your plane going at all time. But here's the interesting thing. None of your activities exist and are more important than each other. Their main purpose is to help you maintain or advance your mental availability.
Mm.
So you may have an
So,
event, and some people have events and they think like the event is like the big thing. Well, maybe the event is just for you to, not saying for you, but in general, maybe the event is just a really significant way you can increase your mental availability with your audience and with your
when
customers
you
at
say
the event.
mental availability, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's so I met you through my friend Todd, and Todd told me
Right.
about you, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, this guy's amazing." He cuts through the crap. So I already had this little memory about, oh, he cuts through the crap. And then this morning you said to me, like, "Oh yeah, that microphone's crap. Don't use that one." And for all the listeners know, I've got this like fantastic little Yeti mic, and we're not using it because it's not working. And because he's like, "Yeah, it's crap." So then I have another memory. So now I have a memory with you about this microphone. And so
That validated a preconceived notion.
yeah, it's just that that like, oh, that was a perception I had of you. And then you validated like, yeah, this is what I think about that. This is what I know from my experience. Here you go. I'd love to share that with you. This is what I know. So then when I see you online, when I listen to more, YouTube episodes and things, so obviously I'm going to be building on those memories. And when somebody's like, "Hey, I've got a business problem. I think I need somebody. I need something in my life, like a mentor." I'm not like, "Dude, you got to go talk to Donnie. He is the guy who will connect you." I don't know if it's one of his groups. I don't know if it's his, program. I don't like, but I just know I need to connect him with you. And what that's done is you're top of mind when I have a problem
Yeah.
or the right scenario comes along. Like when I'm thirsty, I need a drink. So I'm going to go get some water. But when I'm at a gas station, what am I going to go grab? Typically the brand that I have the most experience with and have the most memories with, the brand with the more memories and the more associations is the one that we think of first. And so there's a whole lot of science to messaging,
Yep.
and there's only 4 types of messages. And it's funny as you see, a really cool commercial on the Super Bowl, but then you never hear of that brand again. oh, here's the cool Audi or Acura.
Because it was just one story.
Right. But then they introduced a brand, but there wasn't a sign to drive event or a coupon for Oatly milk. So there's not a call to action. I don't know what to do. So you can only introduce the brand, have a call to action, talk about a feature and benefit, and then share what the experience is. Those are the 4 types of messages. And you have to cycle through those regularly to keep driving those touch points. And the brand that doesn't do that, the brand that doesn't have distinctive assets to help make memories and then work through those 4 main types of messaging, they're not going to get bought. And there's another myth about, we think, branding and marketing is educating people. It's teaching. No, it's not. You have 95% of your brain is on autopilot, and it is your job to get seen so you can get sold. Because unseen is unsold. And we know this to be true. If nobody knows about us, how are they ever going to work with us?
Right. All right. So I want to unpack a few things here because there's a bunch in there. So this really hit home for me when you said top of mind, because I am a true believer that the power of networking is not about who you know. It's that personal brand story. But yeah, it's who's actually talking about you in the right conversations, right? Who's bringing your name up because you are top of mind. So that really sent it home for me to allow me to wrap my head around, building this case for the brand science, which I'm actually kind of geeking out on myself now. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I'm also looking at a perspective of, man, as a business owner, 3 companies we're running, we got the podcast going, we got the books, we got the speaking, we got all these moving parts. How the hell do I find time to bring all the brand science into it so we're creating all these legs? I mean, I'm looking at somebody who's a solopreneur, or maybe they have an under 5-person team, and none of them is a marketing person yet. They're a lot of VAs, a lot of support, maybe an automation specialist, that type. How the hell do you put all these brand you put a name to it that escaped me, but legs out there, if you will, that just seems like a moment of overwhelm trying to think through all that.
So we talked about initially creating your brand, and you may have gone through a process where you worked on those. And then we talked about, okay, now we want to add a few more assets, typefaces. Here's a great example. If you go and use a typeface that someone else, like, we say font. Font is the file. So this is why I say typeface instead. So you use the font.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's how somebody geeks out on it, is there's a whole different language,
right?
That they use.
So we know them as fonts. So I'll just say the word fonts. So all your buddies are using this font. If you use that font too, you don't want to drive traffic to them. So you want fonts or typefaces that conceptually and psychologically speak to the value and the style. I do this on my website and with my materials. So brand science is a really chunky thing. It can be really overwhelming. So the way that I combat this is I use Nunito. Nunito is rounded, it's soft, it's easy to read, and it actually kind of gives it a really fresh, fun vibe. Because, and when I introduce myself to folks, one of the words I say is, I'm the adorkable brand scientist next door. I'm fun, I'm lighthearted. We talked about cookies and dessert items and stained teeth. We've talked about these examples, and I'm trying to make it lighthearted and easy. So yes, I may be a sage archetype, but one of the values for my brand is to ensure that it's easy to digest and it's not overwhelming and it doesn't feel like, oh, that's too complicated. So that's one of the ways that, so I'm having a typeface and adding assets that help me tell my story, makes people think of me first. You go ahead.
No, it's just funny to me. So 2 things that ran through my head is, when I worked in St. Louis, I worked in a very large marketing department. Part of the team, and I think there was 40-something people in the marketing department. Part of the team was a guy that all he did was pick the fonts for the graphic designs. So all the imaging and everything out, he chose a very specific fonts. And I never understood why they had a font guy, right? And type whatever you said, guy. you, so that just made me giggle a little bit inside that was a reason they had that particular
Sure.
person doing a thing. The second thing that ran through my head was, okay, I love Canva, right? Canva is like crack cocaine for me. I can play on Canva all day long. Right? I should be running a business, but I'll find myself screwing around in Canva, right? And I've heard the idea of getting a consistent font and the likes or consistent type form, however you want to go. I'm going to say font. That's easier for me to remember,
Sure.
right? As I'm in there, but sometimes the template just looks freaking killer inside of Canva, and I want to go with that.
Sure.
I mean, so two questions. One, how do I choose that font that goes for my brand? Second, how consistent to that font do I have to stay in everything that I do?
Sure. So when I'm building this out, your question is really good. When we're building this out, if I was going to say, we did the research on your category, we would come back and say, here are the new assets we want to add to your brand so that you can have the 25 to 35. We would choose those based on what is the voice, what is the conceptual ideas that you're what fits and what is also that will be distinct for you. When people see it, they'll think of you. And then you'll have those. And when you, I don't know if you remember Bob Ross. Most people
I love Bob Ross.
Know how he talks about having, putting a little cloud here, a little tree here. What does he do?
Happy tree.
He goes down. My favorite Bob Ross episode is when somebody wrote in and said, I can't paint, I'm colorblind. So he did the whole thing in grays.
Great.
So good.
Yep.
So what does he do? He goes down to his palette, and this is why I call it a palette, is you have your colors, your music, your shape. Imagine, like that little palette that someone holds, and that's your go-to thing. So similar to if you went to a restaurant, the more menu items there are in a restaurant, the better chances you're going to find something that you like to eat. Same thing with your brand. The more assets that you have, if you have five typefaces, I had to count with my hand here. If you have 5 typefaces, you may have one that's just for pull quotes. That's the only time you use it is pull quotes. You may have another one that's just for headers.
Pull quotes.
Title. Pull quote is like this was the best episode ever with Staeven. That's boop, we're going to put that on there later. This is the best episode ever. So that may be a pull quote. That may be a quote testimonial. So you may use that one typeface just in that one way. Then you may have the body copy on your website and all your documents and all those things. And it may be a common one on all computers. It may not be, but it's easy to read. It helps you deliver the content. If you want to look real professional and technical, there's professional and technical typefaces out there. If you want to be easy and casual, there's easy and casual ones out there. So the goal is you've got all these assets on this palette, and like a menu, variety increases the chance you'll find the best options for any specific situation. So the thing with this palette is that they're not ingredients that always have to be there, but they're variables that can be utilized based on your format, your channel, whether it's Canva, whether it's YouTube, whether it's the bottom of the screen saying it's, our names on the video. And we're organizing it as a palette, but you may be like, I'm doing a new social media campaign. We should have a color on there. And here's some photographs of our human asset. Here's Donnie. And then what else? Here's the name of the program. Okay, so there's a word. And then, we got to have a brand mark on there because this is in our feed regularly. We want people to see it in their. So you kind of become your own little Bob Ross with your brand. You're grabbing the assets. It's not about matchy-matchy. Now, if you are University of Texas and have 50,000 departments, yes, consistency, and we'll have a production guide. But the average small business owner doing, anywhere from 30K a year to 30K a week, regardless of your size, you don't need a production style guide. What you need are assets that you're using regularly, consistently, so that when people see you out and about, around, online, in person, at events, whatever, they see those brand marks, they see those colors, they see those different sensory assets, And here's the thing. We talk about marketing. We used to think it was teaching people. It's actually not. We're not trying to teach people anything. They are distracted, emotional people, and they are sponges soaking up stuff around them. And we want them to just soak up our stuff. And the way
Yeah.
you said earlier, and I want to bring this back up, is really, really important. You're like, Steven, how do I do this? This is so frustrating. You can do these things on your own. You can do the brand asset checklist, find out how many you have, and that'll help you figure out which ones you need next. So it's a bit.ly link, bit.ly brand science checklist. So you can check that out. It's going to be in the show notes.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
once you do that and you know how many assets you have, there's really seven rules. Um, Use assets. Number one, most important one. And create and use distinctive brand assets. And then you've also got to do this every 90 days. You should probably have a business plan or business goals or business sprints that you're doing. Well, use this as part of the way that you do business. Have an initiative that's on there for your next 90 days. So if you are going to do an event coming up, then your marketing for the event should make sure it has all the assets on it. So part of this is like right woven in it, but then there's other things like, oh, we should probably look at testing and seeing we've got, a whole bunch of assets. We don't know if they're good or not. You can test them. I can test them, with the brand science checklist. But the goal is test them, find out the ones that aren't working. It's like SKU optimization. Which ones aren't selling? Get rid of them. Which ones do people not think of you? You might think that blue is so important to you and your story. At the end of the day, I love you. And these stories that we tell ourselves about being, it's a family owned company, like so are 5 bajillion other
Billion.
companies.
Yeah.
That's not distinct. But, some of the stories that we think are so intrinsic to who we are, if they look just like everyone else, it doesn't matter how much meaning is in there. So what we find out is meaning doesn't last. It's actually just being distinct. So the example that I love to bring up is I love Seth Godin's commentary about the purple cow. You
Purple
notice the
cow.
purple cow. But here's the thing, Sethy. Let's have lunch, but there are no purple cows. Unless somebody painted it, there are no purple cows. So you may notice a brown Guernsey or a Jersey cow in a field of Angus. That's branding. Like you have to use the systems and what actually is real. Now, not the best example, but it just shows you like you can't just be different for the sake of being different, because then you're not kind of like, it's like baseball. First base is the customer cues. It's what they're looking for. Ooh, chocolate chip, crunchy, chewy, gluten-free, crispy, whatever just the cues are. But then there's the industry norms, flat pack, shrink wrap, parchment cups, whatever. Like you can't be too different. So if you want to say, well, I'm a fresh baked cookie. Okay, that's great. But you're over in the bakery. Now you're a bakery item. You no longer can do competition here. So then the baseball diamond becomes, where do we hit the ball? Well, we can just ride on the coattails because most brands are near knockoffs of each other. And so there's blue sandwich chocolate cookies that look just like Oreos. And I love going to the cookie aisle, see what those freaks at Oreo are doing, like what new flavors they've invented, like chocolate chip carrot cake muffin. Oh, cool. So we see there may be category norms of colors and flavors and things, but you have to be in your category and follow those norms. And then hitting a home run is doing what visually and verbally and sensory wise other people aren't doing, but it has to be in your ball diamond, in your category.
Man, it's a lot to unpack, but it makes sense in my head. So I hope the listeners,
I hope so too.
It does as well. So, once upon a time, going back a little bit to your palette idea, which I really like that concept, hired a marketing firm to come in to help us figure out marketing strategy. So what we assumed we were getting and what was delivered were two different things. Obviously, a lot of the error is on me knowing the right question to ask when we were hiring a firm, right? So what we thought we were getting was a whole marketing strategy, game plan, and the likes, and then we would get execution on the back of it. What they handed me was a brand kit.
Right.
they reshaped my logo. They gave me some pretty fonts, and we ended up not using it and severing that relationship
Sure.
because it wasn't what we're
Sure.
looking for. And I think a lot of people, as they're looking at their marketing, they're looking at their branding, and I know I'm using them interchangeably, but I'm thinking like a small business owner. You know, there's a lot of where the hell do I spend my money
Sure.
to make sure I get the impact now, trying to play the long game here,
Sure.
but need ROI, right, off
Right.
of investments and the like. So my fear would be working with a company like yours would be, is these guys just going to give me another brand kit? And
Sure.
I don't need another brand kit, right? What I need is how do we go to market as fast as possible, get ROI from this
Sure.
endeavor so that investment gets paid back
Sure.
quickly.
So the challenge there, yeah, that's a really good question. And I hope, first off, I want to hold space for people that have been through that. Like, that sucks. I want to acknowledge that. Like,
Right.
if you've been through that and that happened to you, that sucks. And I'm so sorry. It's like if you've gone to a bad church and you've had a hurtful experience there. It's like same thing for me. When you have a marketer that's really kind of like hosed you in the negative way, like, and you're like, I'm sorry.
Right.
So please don't bring that baggage to me. I want you to carry your own bag here.
I can't hold you guilty for something you did not know.
Right.
Fair.
But here's the interesting thing is the majority of marketers are marketers in name only.
I agree with that 100 billion%.
My friend Dan wrote a book called Snake Oil. Dan Russell, he's a award-winning neuromarketer and expert on funnels, and he can tell you the 3 C's of campaigns, conversions, and customers. And but he talks about minnows and minnows, marketing and name only. And unfortunately, when we go look for help, it's typically the people, they're not trying to bamboozle us. They are not. I believe in my heart of hearts, they actually believe they're doing the good things. But what they don't know what they also don't know. And so come to find out, they're just regurgitating what they've learned, what I like to call on the back of the bus. I don't know if you rode the bus as a kid. I did as a kid, and all the cool kids sat in the back. And you wanted to hear what they had to say, and they were the leading authority. And interestingly enough, that is how most of us learned about the birds and the bees, who was dating whom, and other interesting, important topics of the day. The same thing happens with our businesses, is that we are listening to people on the back of the bus. It's the difference between the back of the bus and then an age-appropriate, children's Encyclopedia Britannica on reproductive systems.
Right.
Like nobody, maybe your parents sat you down and gave you that book. I'm also sorry for that. That was probably awkward. But the same thing is we need age and stage appropriate language for our businesses to understand how do we navigate this space.
Well, and to that point, I think what most of the marketers are doing is they hear Gary Vee say something, so that now becomes the thing. Or they went through a webinar or a workshop that says, oh, you need to create a brand kit for your company first. And so to your point, they're doing what they believe to be true.
Right. They're doing what they believe to be true. And here's what's interesting is there isn't a foundational, there may be an action or an item or a theory. But at the end of the day, Gary Vee or Seth Godin, any of these incredible minds that are sharing theories, and I want to point out, I love them and they're sharing theories. Brand science is based on qualitative and quantitative empirical evidence-based metrics. We can measure them. We can look at them. I can go and look on the trademark electronic search system and find out, the other Helm brand marks that exist out there and whether or not you can use that on clothing to trademark that one on clothing and say that you're now a clothing brand because maybe somebody else already has that. But you only do business in the 035 business space. Oh, and maybe the educational space. So we'll trademark it in that. That is empirical. It's metrics. I can look at it. I can say also the increase of the use of, Greco-Roman heraldry and images increased 39% from the time, Troy and 300 and all these movies came out. Like I can see the timeline. I can see how these things are used. So that's why I feel so strongly about brand science. And so instead of a theory that we're going to apply, here's the thing, we can back up and actually created a program. And this is not a pitch. This is just exactly why this is such a problem. It's called Brandpreneur. And instead of people going to agencies and saying, hey, what do I need? And then here's what they happen. You go to that guy or that agency person, guy or girl, and they come back and they share with you, hey, Donnie, we've got this package. And what do? They share you a process, they share their products, and it's based on their profit, honestly, and it's their process, but they're giving you like Goldilocks, like here's too big, here's too small, and here's just right. Like,
Right.
really? Like, why couldn't you just pitch me the right thing? So then here's
Ooh,
where
what a
this,
great way of saying it. I love everything about that.
like, why can't you just share me exactly what I need? Here's why. Because the majority of marketers don't know what they don't know. And they also don't know that when we're building your business, there's multiple facets and they are only operating in one. And brand science works in an age and stage format. So yes, we are going to talk about your brand because there is, when we look at the brand authority pyramid, we break it apart. There's 4 triangles there. And this is the brand one. First thing on the list is you have to have your brand platform, your brand identity, your strategy, your archetype, your story, your messaging, your core, all this, values and things. Values is actually on the bottom. It's the base. So leadership and values and your core idea. That's the
Right.
chamber. Like, what does a pyramid do? It's enshrining something really important so it can elevate it. So when we look at brand platform is this really important one at the bottom of the base. And then here's the other thing. There's age and stage appropriate um, things that are based on, traction, growth, uh, scale, and authority. So you can't get to an authority level with your business in your market if you are over at your brand missing your brand platform. We build pyramids from the base up on all 4 sides. And that marketing agency has come to you and said, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this. And they've not addressed any of the other needs that you need to help your business scale up. So you may be doing, you may be a category leader in your own mind, but then we go and we look at the brand authority pyramid and be like, oh wow, my brand platform, is weak. We want to make sure that that's solid. So you're always your lowest common denominator. So we have to work on that. It's like, it doesn't matter if you can bench 500 pounds if can't do leg day. Like, you got to be able to
Right.
walk
Right.
to get there. So we need that leg day. So at the end of the day, my goal is I want to empower people to look at their businesses and understand this is what I need. So folks that go through the Brandpreneur program, and the reason I share this is because I want this for everybody. I want people to learn about brand science, and I want them to go to these agencies and say, hey, we are stuck in growth mode
Yep.
and we're at growth mode and we're struggling in our operations to connect that seamlessly with our marketing. How can you help us do that? Go. Now, wouldn't that be empowering for you? Wouldn't that be empowering to say, hey, we've got a brand deck. We're struggling with a customer experience issue. We don't want to take this out of house. But what we're finding is we want to develop the right technology to support our back end. Go. Hey, we actually have some challenges with our internal staff. Everyone's feeling, a little disconnected. How can we bring them together on a regular basis? Because we're all remote. And how do I pass on that brand culture when I'm in a remote company? Go. So all of a sudden, we've taken the power away from these marketers who are going to waste our time because all of a sudden they don't have the right tools. Well, no, I've got a package Goldilocks too
Right.
small, Goldilocks too soft, and Goldilocks just right.
Yeah.
So
Dude, I've
actually,
actually
at
I
the end
sat
of the
across
day,
from the
they're about solving their problem. They're only about selling their products and making you think that you need their product. So then you leave thinking, oh, I must have done something wrong. I didn't ask the right questions. I wasn't doing the right things with my marketing. So we go to these workshops and things and we go, and some of them may work. Here's the thing, but it doesn't mean they're based on fact and metrics. You know, anybody can lose weight just eating less calories. But if you eat this magic Twinkie that's less calories and that's the only thing you eat, of course you're going to lose weight eating the Twinkie because it's a reduced caloric intake. That's the same thing with this marketing stuff. That if you go to these unvetted sources that aren't using metrics, that aren't looking at your age and stage of the business, helping you grow up each of those 4 things, And you said, how do I keep this from being overwhelmed? We talked about distinctive brand assets. We talked about, you know, memory structures. Well, you want to get noticed, and you want to be consistent, and you want to stay competitive, and you need to make it easy for people to buy. I think that's the number one thing, is making it easy for everyone to buy and making it easy to buy. Don't tell me crazy statistics. Tell me about underwater basket weaving for otters, cute wet baskets, tasty ice cream that won't melt because you eat it so fast. Like get to the jugular. Tell me why I should care. So when we focus on, and this is a really good one, and I don't want to derail anyone's, I'm probably going to get hate messages about this, but everyone spent so much time on customer personas. And unfortunately, there's no such thing as Chloe, who's 23, who lives in Chicago, who shops at Whole Foods, has a French bulldog, loves Pinterest, and like seafoam teal. She doesn't exist. Now, what may exist is that she is a pet owner. She may be a person who uses the train in Chicago. And so all of a sudden, what are the states that I want to help her with? And if I don't see her as a problem, or I see her states as a problem, like, we got to fix stuff for Chloe, but rather like, what does Chloe want? Chloe wants to not always have to use the train. Chloe doesn't want to always have to walk her own dog. So she wants to like go from this state to that state. So when we make our messaging universal, we're not focusing on a special type of customer that is just getting into these nuanced demographics that just don't exist. And at the end of the day, we really should be targeting not repeat or heavy buyers, because if you drink 2 Cokes a year, you're a heavy buyer. You actually want to target everybody in your market, which is light, mild, moderate, and heavy. And then if you're selling that to everyone, you're getting noticed, you're using your distinctive brand assets consistently and competitively. That's how you grow your brand equity.
All right, I'm going to bring you back on the show because I want to dive into this personas further, because I want to wrap my head around that ideology more, because personas is sold heavy. I mean, we've
one of the
gone through the
heaviest sold
practice
marketing Kool-Aids there is.
right, and we've spent a good amount of time as a company coming up with our persona. So I want to do that. So we'll pick that up on another episode. But the last thing I want to kind of really get my head wrapped around is this still feels like a lot. Like there's a lot to do when you think about your brand. And bandwidth mentally, as a business owner, you only have so many things that you can focus on at a time. And, this feels, and it shouldn't feel this way, but this feels like, okay, this is that thing we'll get to.
Sure.
Right down the road, because we're still putting out fires and trying to build things. And when the company gets to X, we'll do X type thing, right? We have that kind of thought process to it. For somebody who's thinking in that regards, this is a nice to have down the road type of thing. How should I reframe that in my head? So this is something that I should adamantly focus on now in the business.
Still there?
Yep.
Okay. So let's reframe this and say, let's just start with, is your business important to you? And I would ask you, is your business important to you? And how much time do you have to waste? And when it comes,
my reversal of that question is, how do I know this is the thing that I should prioritize over everything else?
Sure. So the reason brand science is so important is because all the other facets of your business are derived from it. It's actually how your business functions in the minds of people. And until we live in a world that is all using Braille and none of our senses, and like robots just ship us stuff on auto delivery and we're told what to purchase, like the mind of the consumer, the mind of your audience, the mind of your customer, whatever words, the mind of your clients is the most important territory for you to invest in. And understanding that at the end of the day, all brand growth occurs as a result of having high mental and physical availability. The key, this is an empirical fact. Studies have been done at the Ehrenberg Base Institute in Australia. And if anybody wants to look that up, they can. That's actually one of the major homes of brand science abroad. And the Ehrenberg, the EBI, we'll just call it EBI, Ehrenberg Base Institute, actually provides pay-to-play programs for billion-dollar brands. And this is what those billion-dollar brands are investing in. So if Coca-Cola and Mondelez and Nestle and all these major brands have been investing in this since day one, wouldn't it behoove you to spend, a little time learning the basics? Because they know that the key to brand growth is having high mental and physical availability. And that happens by having highly distinct, well-known brand assets. That is the reason branding is so important. Not because it's what people feel, what people think. Again, puppy, another conversation. But empirically, when we look at it, this is how products are bought and sold, using the semiotic boxes in our head and with your brand assets, with the helm, with your colors, with you as the spokesperson, the names of your programs, the names of your products. All those together create distinctive memory structures that are unique to you. And the more of those you have, the more territory, and nodes is the technical memory term. So there's like memory science in there too. The more nodes you have. And so the more nodes you have, the more people will think of you. And that is why, because that's how you are going to do business. Unseen is unsold. So then, yes, you want to attract new customers and new opportunities. How do you do that? By getting in front of, irrational, distracted, emotional viewers. Maybe irrational is not the right term, but it's not, we're shifting from teaching and this idea, the old way of marketing was teaching people and they're rational. No, they're emotional and we need to distract them to get their attention because they are on autopilot. So once we've distracted them, we're going to use that same system. Now there's a whole bunch of conversations. Isn't this manipulative? Does Coca-Cola feel manipulative to you?
Right.
They're just everywhere. Why? Because that's the level of where they are in the brand authority pyramid. They're at the top. They've already moved past scale. So they're already an authority. So they don't need to introduce their products really unless they come up with a new product like cinnamon Coke or orange vanilla Coke, which is the best one on the planet. So unless they're introducing, they're at a level of scale where they really don't need to do much. They're just maintaining mental availability. So
love it.
You ask, why is this so important?
Yep. Yeah.
And I hope I nailed it. I brought it down. Like I love that so many people want to talk about branding and the feelings and the experiences. And yes, those are emotional experiences do have a place in the experience timeline with your customers and, getting their feedback, making sure they're happy. But we're not even there yet because they haven't even picked up, your item from the store or online or clicked your thing because they don't know who you are.
Right.
And this is the way. As the Mandalorian says, this is the way.
Yeah, this is the way. Dude, Staeven, this has been a lot of fun, man. I actually really learned a lot through this. And I be honest with you, I felt like I knew a lot about branding coming into this. So thank you for teaching me a lot of things that I hadn't thought or even heard about to this depth before. So I really appreciate you hanging out.
And before I let you go, I again want to mention, if this is overwhelming for you, just feel like you're just having a Matrix moment. This is what most people have when they're like, I just had the orange pill because I love orange. So, so they had the orange pill and now they're like, oh, wow, this is actually how the world works. And that's great. Marinate, serenade, percolate on this, listen to this episode again. And when you're ready, go to bit.ly/brand science checklist, and you can check out, an assessment tool that just helps you count. That's all it is. It says, hey, here's our palette, our Bob Ross palette of assets, and here's how many you have. Great job. Or here's how many you have. Here's an opportunity for you to add more. Okay. And you can do that yourself, or you can hire somebody else to do it. Depends on where you are in your journey, what you want to have done. But you at least know that it's a priority, because the more of these assets you have that help share visually and verbally who you are, what you do, and why what you do matters, then your business and your brand is going to be able to grow, because you have high mental and physical availability.
Love it, brother. Dude, thanks again for doing this. A lot of fun, a lot of knowledge, man. I hope they get a lot out of this one.
You bet. And thanks everyone for listening. It was great. Great sharing all this with you. And I hope it's really insightful for you and sparks a lot of great conversations.